You know, when most of us think about grief, we tend to picture this straight line, a series of steps we have to check off. But what if that whole idea is missing the point? Today, we're going to dive into a much more dynamic and honestly more human way of looking at bereavement. We'll touch on everything from how we cope with loss to how kids navigate it, and even how the people who help us grieve themselves.
So let's start with that big idea most of us have heard of, right? The famous 5 stages of grief. But is that really how it works? Like some neat little checklist we all have to follow? The reality of loss, as you probably know, is so much messier and more personal than that. And it turns out, modern thinking points to a very different kind of journey altogether.
You know, what's so interesting is how our whole perspective on this has shifted. Older models kind of painted grief as this passive thing, like we're just adrift in a boat, waiting for a storm to pass us by. But what if we're not just adrift? What if we're actually the ones at the oars rowing? What if grieving is an active, demanding process that we have to consciously navigate? That's the core idea we're going to explore.
And that idea brings us to a much more modern framework, the dual process model. You can really think of it as a new kind of map for the journey of grief, one that's a lot more flexible and, frankly, reflects how we actually cope with the incredible stress of loss.
So, what is this dual process model, or DPM, exactly? Well, at its heart, it's a model for how we cope with stress. The big idea is that instead of just moving through stages one by one, a grieving person is actually moving back and forth between 2 totally different but equally crucial ways of processing what's happened.
Let's break those 2 processes down. So on one side, you have what are called loss-oriented processes. This is what we usually think of as grief work, right? It's directly confronting the loss, feeling the pain, the sadness, all of it. Then on the other side, there's the restoration-oriented path. This is all about rebuilding, figuring out life's changes, trying new things, even forming a new identity. And here's the kicker. The model says a healthy journey means walking on both of these paths.
So what drives this whole thing? It's a key concept called oscillation. It's basically the natural back and forth movement between those 2 processes. I mean, think of it like a pendulum swinging. Healthy grieving isn't about getting stuck in the pain, but it's also not about ignoring the pain either. It's all about the rhythm, the swing between confronting the loss for a while and then taking a break to focus on rebuilding your life. This movement, it isn't a step backward. It's actually a healthy, adaptive way to cope.
Okay, so this idea of actively navigating grief, it doesn't just apply to adults. Let's switch gears for a minute and look at this through a completely different lens, how children experience loss. Because their journey is often shaped by a very unique and still developing understanding of the world.
All right, this is a really crucial point. There's this huge, common myth out there that kids don't really feel loss as deeply as adults do. But the research is crystal clear. That is just not true. Children might not have the words to express it in the same way, but they absolutely experience profound pain and really powerful emotions when they lose someone they love.
So how does a child's understanding of death even form? Well, it happens in stages. When they're really little, say 3 to 5, they might see death as something temporary, kind of like someone is sleeping or just went away for a while. As they get a bit older, maybe 6 to 9, they start to get that it's final, but they might not see it as something that happens to everyone or to them. It's usually not until they're about 10 or older that the whole concept really clicks, that death is final, irreversible, and universal.
Okay, so knowing all that, how can we actually help a grieving child? The guidance here is pretty clear. First, and this is a big one, use honest, gentle, and direct language. Euphemisms like Grandma went to sleep can be so confusing and even scary for a kid. It's also really important to let them participate in rituals like funerals if they want to. It helps make the loss feel real and understandable. And maybe most important of all, we have to reassure them over and over that they are not to blame for what happened, not in any way. Now for our final section, we're going to shift our focus to a group of people we almost never consider in this context: the counselors, the caregivers, the healthcare workers who are on the front lines, supporting the bereaved. They are absolutely not immune to grief.
The unique challenge these helpers face has a name. It's called bereavement overload. Just try to imagine being constantly surrounded by other people's grief, day in and day out, without ever having the time or the space to process your own feelings about it. It's this immense emotional toll that comes from carrying the weight of so many other people's losses.
So what leads to this kind of overload? Well, it's really a perfect storm of factors. You've got the relentless exposure to pain, absolutely crushing caseloads. Some studies found counselors seeing up to 15 clients a day, and of course being constantly confronted with mortality.
If you don't have really strong support systems in place, the path to burnout can be a very short one. So after exploring all these different sides of bereavement, what are the most important things to walk away with? Let's just quickly summarize the key takeaways from our explainer here.
First, healthy grieving is not a straight line of stages. It's a dynamic, back-and-forth oscillation between facing your loss and rebuilding your life. Second, we have to remember that children absolutely do grieve, and we need to support them in ways that actually match where they are developmentally. And finally, we have to appreciate that caregivers are also incredibly vulnerable to grief, and supporting them is absolutely essential if we want to prevent burnout.
And all of this really leaves us with one final question to think about. Whether we're navigating our own loss, or we're supporting a child, or maybe we're working as a caregiver, the central challenge is the same. How do we create a life that honors what we've lost while also embracing what is still here? How can we possibly make space for both our loss and our life?